You're bringing up a point. No, you're bringing up a point that is obviously true that doesn't need to be said and has nothing to do with the conversation.
Why did you make fun of me?
Ignoring it. I was thinking about being forced down. I was thinking...
She's not... Oh, sorry. Fuck, I'm being way too aggressive in this combo. I don't think she's understanding what he's saying at all. She's trying to go back to the body keeps score thing.
And I think you should watch that conversation that she had with the... what is it, psychologist?
I think I'll just end up getting triggered.
You're not going to get triggered. You're going to feel vindicated, okay? Because from the jump, he's taking up your position. Mm-hmm. It's not until the very end that she words it very... she words it in a way where he almost has to give her some form of agreement because it does seem like she's depending on it.
Sure.
To be fair.
Yeah.
As someone who has been in therapy, there's a way that you can load something to let your therapist or the person on the receiving end giving you counsel know that they need to take care of you.
Yeah, of course. It's like a social...
And that's... Yeah. So I think if you watch it from the get-go, you'll feel fine. But you'll get triggered at the end.
Welcome to today's live stream. I'm so excited. I'm here with Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm so excited to talk to him today about trauma. Thank you so much for talking to me today.
Thanks for having me.
Can you give us a review rating? I mean, I don't know. Damn, these are old as fuck accusations. I mean, it looks kind of bad, but I don't know what Adam's response is to it.
If you guys feel like his audio is too low or my audio is too low, please just let me know and I'll try to, try to fix it during the stream. But otherwise, we are jumping into this conversation because of the conversation I had with the streamer Destiny, who's a friend of mine and a wonderful person, who asked a very challenging question, and I feel this is way above my pay grade, and I wanted to reach out to somebody that I really admire and respect. I watch his work, Dr. Kirk's work, on YouTube, and so if you guys want to check him out, I will link his channel for you guys. The question that we're facing today is that question that Destiny and I really argued about for days, which was, do we think promiscuous or sexually liberated people versus repressed or sexually repressed or conservative people experience trauma from rape differently? So would a promiscuous person or sexually liberated person have an easier time of dealing with their trauma versus a sexually repressed or conservative person? And I wondered if you had any expert thoughts on that.
She almost has it in the framing of the first question, but I don't know if she's just fundamentally unable to engage with the topic or what. I'm not sure. I don't know. I really don't know. I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to unpack. The first thing I'll ask you is how we define these two groups exactly, because you're grouping promiscuous people, meaning people, I guess, who have more sex with more people greater than average, right? Mm-hmm. And then
how should she frame it? The way, I'll repeat for the 50 millionth time, but I think you either can have this talk or you can't. I'll say it for the 50 millionth time. My wondering is, are there certain protective or at-risk factors that can influence how likely a person is to experience trauma through some adverse event, is essentially what I'm asking, right? I think if you understand what I'm asking, it's pretty easy, but it just gets framed down to like, if you fuck a lot, is it impossible to traumatize you, I guess, is how a lot of people read into this, but...
And you're also attributing the quality of someone who is sexually liberated. What do you mean by sexually liberated?
Well, that's the problem. The assumption might be that someone who is promiscuous could be sexually liberated. But of course, the nuance, I think, would challenge me to think that that's not always the case, right? So that's the complicated nature of this question. I mean, even asking what is trauma, I think, would be a great question to ask. But that's what's so difficult about this conversation is there's this assumption that, if you're comfortable with sex, you should be more comfortable with an assault, which is...
It's like, I don't know. I think she fundamentally is not capable of engaging with the question. I don't know what else to say. I'm not sure.
Hard for my brain to process.
Right. I think that's the central question that was being asked. And there's been a lot of research over the past 50 years, a lot of research in the last 20, 30 years on factors that contribute to an increase in the negative outcomes after a rape or sexual assault, and protective factors or factors that were in place before the event and after the event, behaviors, attitudes, social structure, legal structure.
Wait, what is the Euler time? What are we all spamming on? Rare oiler. Wait, what just happened? Oh, 16 more steps. Oh, thanks. Gotcha. Okay, jeez.
Oppression, comorbidities or co-occurring issues, like if you already come into it with depression or trauma, it can cause greater trauma afterwards potentially. And there's a lot of, I could go into the weeds on all those factors, but what you're talking about is attitudinal factors, things that have to do with our ideas, our beliefs, our attitudes, our perspective, pre-rape, pre-sexual assault, and might that be a factor in protecting people from the negative effects of which PTSD, dissociation, avoiding relationships, depression, anxiety, there's a lot of negative effects downstream after an assault. And the research does show that attitudes can be a protective factor.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
But there's so many other things that are related to why someone would have
I literally
PTSD
tried
after.
to talk about these predictors and you freaking memed at me.
I didn't meme at all. This is literally my argument from the very beginning. But
When I started to say people like that have mental illness or disability, and then you just started fucking memeing at me.
I started memeing at you because you brought up weird edge cases, I think, when we were having a generalized conversation about people having difficulty turning people
No,
down
you're the one
for
that
sex.
said schizophrenia or somebody in a wheelchair. You were just like making fun of the fact that
I was making fun of the fact that you were bringing up weird exceptions that were totally irrelevant to the general point that was...
He's just been talking about mental illness. He literally just said depression. That's not weird, is it? That's pretty like general.
You're bringing up a point. No, you're bringing up a point that is obviously true that doesn't need to be said and has nothing to do with the conversation.
So why did you make fun of me?
Because
You
it
could've just
was
been like,
obviously
okay,
true,
ignore
had
it.
nothing to do with the conversation.
But it's literally part of their conversation right now, which is relevant to the
Because
greater
he's having
conversation
no,
everyone
our
was
conversation
having.
had to do with like likelihood for like being raped or something, or ways
Yeah.
to avoid it. And then you were saying, well, sometimes
Predictors
I
of
don't know how to.
sexual assault
I
are
don't.
those
No,
things.
no. Predictors of sexual assault aren't necessarily predictors of how you would deal with a sexual assault. These are two totally separate conversations. But also, this happens. Pixie did it to me earlier. Another person did it when they messaged me. This weird thing happens. It only happens with the sexual assault conversation. It only happens with this. Okay. If I say, "What can I do to stay safe during a car accident?" and someone's like, "Oh, you could put on a seatbelt." Okay. Well, what if the car rolls over and it catches on fire? It's like, oh, okay. Don't go into cars that like roll over easy. Stay away from SUVs and wear your seatbelt. Oh, okay. Well, what if somebody T-bones me though? Well, I guess like pay attention at stoplights. What if the stoplight's not working though? Like in that case, it wouldn't help, right? It's this weird thing that happens where I'll say something like, oh, like you should say like no to guys. Well, what if they don't take no for an answer? I don't know. Well, then I start a physical boundary. What if he fucking breaks my arm? Then I guess I don't know. What if I'm mentally retarded? I don't know. Like it's a numbers game. You do this weird thing where you bring up this like what about? It's like yeah, I mean those are part of it, but like it has nothing to do with addressing the overall broad point. And it only happens in this like conversation related to sexual assault where you just like you bring up like a random thing. It's like in general you should be able to say no, or in general like there might be things that predispose to rape. Okay, well what about some mentally ill people? Like okay, go to therapy, get medication. I don't know how that factors into the conversation.
Well, I mean, I wasn't even bringing it up as like some big argument against you. I just felt like it was important to mention in the context of that conversation, right? I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, if it's literally coming up now in the conversation, surely it must be.
Our conversation wasn't even the same thing as this conversation. Our conversation had to do with how to avoid being sexually assaulted. Their conversation is what is the likelihood of developing trauma in relation to a sexual assault. They're not even the same conversation.
Yeah, but like if you have predictors of like sexual violence against you, knowing what those predictors are and the people that are more likely to be getting sexually assaulted more than one time, which I think was definitely part of our conversation.
Yeah, but these things might be
It's just one.
totally different. For instance, somebody might have been abused in a way by a man, like hit or beat as a child. And it might be, no, I'm saying that it's a disconnected conversation. These conversations have nothing to do with each other, right? Somebody might have been traumatized by a man early in life, and therefore she's got like a higher proclivity to developing trauma to like a sexual assault, but she might avoid all men because of that earlier trauma. So she's actually at a much lower risk of getting sexually assaulted, even though she's got something to make her a higher likelihood of being traumatized. But like these things, it's just a totally separate conversation. These things have nothing to do with each other. They both involve sex, but like that's it.
I think they are related. I think you think they're very different. What? So, like, I agree that, yeah, okay, with your example that you gave, that could be a possibility. So, sure, if you go out of your way to just have no relationships with men, of course. But I feel like they can be very related.
They can be. Wait, why do you say things like this? They can be related. They could be. Why do I care? That has nothing to do with the current conversation. It could be. There's a lot of things in life that could be, but what does that have to do with this?
Because if you are understanding of both, then you'll have a better way to look at a larger picture.
Yeah, and if you understand a lot of math, it'll help your chemistry maybe, but like I'm not going to be teaching math and chemistry at the same time. What do you mean? Yeah, lots of things.
I feel like they're a bit closer related than that since they're all about sexual assault, yeah.
Okay, what was our conversation about?
Well, to be fair, in that one conversation, there were many conversations, right? It wasn't all like narrowed in on the one thing that you mentioned just now. Yeah, it did. We did go over a few different things. Yeah.
No.
Which I don't think is bad. Like,
if you want to find the clip, bring it back and we discuss it. If you want to find the part of the vibe, but I'm pretty sure that conversation specifically had to do with how to avoid sexual assault. And you're like, well, some people are retarded. And it's like, I don't know how that influences the conversation. Yeah, basically, yeah.
No. I said there are predictors of sexual assault, and I tried to give some, and then I got...
Yeah, but it felt like it was being given in opposition to, like, here are, like, steps you can take to reduce the likelihood of being assaulted.
Also, I think that you get the impression that I advocate for, like, learned helplessness or something, that I think that all women just can't do anything to help themselves, and that's not true. So I think that maybe you're not too keen on my point of view because that's where you thought it was coming from.
Okay.
Or do you not? It's just,
I don't know. I don't even know. It's a different conversation. I'm gonna finish this video, okay?
Okay, but one other thing. All right, so I don't know if you remember, but like a few weeks ago, I brought up about resiliency and things like this.
Yep.
And you said, oh, you can't say like they're not resilient enough. That's really rude. But to me, that's all related to this, right?
You can't. I don't know what that sentence is. That doesn't sound like anything I would ever say in my entire life. You can't bring up resiliency. That's really rude. That doesn't sound like a statement I would ever utter.
Yeah, it was a few weeks ago. I came in and said, oh, I don't think that thing you said was that bad. I brought up resiliency, and you were like, you don't want to say that. That's worse. And I was like, oh, okay.
Was I making a joke that if I got in trouble for saying something, somebody would get even madder at me if I said the other thing? Maybe that? I might have been saying like, oh, this would...
It wasn't a joke. Do you remember you had that conversation with Brittany a while back?
Okay.
I
think I might remember what you're saying, yeah, but if it was referring to the conversation specifically with Brittany, I probably wouldn't use the word resiliency because that would probably like incite like an even bigger like triggered response.
Seem rude.
Yeah.
But to me, like, so when it comes to, you know, let's say the example that you use. So somebody was sexually assaulted or just regularly abused when they were a child, so that meant that it changed how they were when they were older, right? But like if the resiliency is an issue, there are like a lot of things that you can do. Like I'm just fighting against this idea that I think like I want women to like remain victims or anything like this, because that's not how I think. And I guess I did get a bit fed up feeling very misrepresented because a lot of people got this impression, and it's just not true. I think there's a lot of things that you can do. There literally is sort of like things like resiliency therapy options, but even outside of therapy, if we're talking sort of there's assertiveness training specifically, like a lot of jobs will offer like assertiveness and confidence training and things like this.
Okay.
Just as sort of like options, because the thing with like what were recommended was like martial arts. You know, it's not always going to work for everyone, for example. So I don't want to say women can't do anything. I don't know if you got that impression from me.
I don't even know. I don't remember the conversation specifically, but
Okay. Well, I could have just been everyone else getting that impression and not you. But yeah, I was just like, fuck. I don't want people to think that women can't do shit. So that's not good.
Okay.
But yeah, I'll let you watch the rest of this. Sorry.
Okay, bye.
Of the hundreds of factors that could be involved. I would say that it's a dubious claim to say that if someone has had sex a lot, which was part of it, right? Promiscuity, which isn't necessarily related, as you said, to sex positivity, that these individuals would somehow be used to, I don't know. I don't know what sort of myth that I could speculate as to what myth that is standing on, but there's no research supporting that people that have sex a lot would be protected from the negative effects downstream after being assaulted.
Now, you said it earlier, and I want to expand upon this because I absolutely don't want to take my friend out of context or anything, and we won't really be focusing on like what his thoughts are.
It's so crazy, but like, I don't like to debate bro this, but I feel like I have to defend my reputation a little bit now, especially given everything. So he agreed 100% with what I said, that there are certain protective or risk factors. And he disagreed with the mischaracterization that Brittany gave of my argument. But I think now she thinks that he agreed with exactly what her said, because her understanding of my argument was me saying sluts like to get raped. That's like, in her mind, that's the point that she ran with, and then that's the point that she presented. Like, my friend was saying that sluts enjoy getting raped so they don't actually get traumatized from it. Do you think that's true? And he's like, obviously that's not true. There might be certain protective or risk factors, but the idea that a slut wants to get raped is probably not it, right? It kind of triggers the fuck out of me, but...
But in general, is the environment afterwards... like if let's say you get assaulted and then you go into a very like supportive, wonderfully like, you know, just like, you've got this, we'll take you to therapy, we love you, you're not different to us, we, you know, a very supportive environment, could that change how the night went? Because in my head, I assume the trauma occurs during the event. And then
my understanding is the research I did afterwards was events. Now, I couldn't find anything related to trauma, but related to developing PTSD, the moments after a traumatizing experience are some of the most important when it comes to whether or not you develop PTSD or not. I don't know what this guy will say, but that's what I found when I was reading. And
gets compounded on as the time goes on. Mm-hmm. So in my head, I'm not sure how trauma could occur afterwards, though some people have reported not feeling traumatized by an event, only to feel traumatized after their friends and family told them they feel like they should be traumatized.
50 tier 1 subs from 34-3 Thanks, buddy. I appreciate it, my dude. There's a monster under my bed. I've been taking bucks for 6 months, training to go down there and fight it. At 3 months in, I'm feeling pretty confident. I hope the monster down there doesn't have the same idea. That'll be bad. Nice.
So I'm trying to figure out that.
Yeah. Again, a lot to unpack. I could lecture for hours, but that would bore your listeners.
I doubt it. They would be intrigued.
But that's two or three different areas there. One is that the last one I'll answer first, which is that the stories you'll hear, or I don't know, you'll hear accounts of people having gone through a difficult event. Then afterwards, even years later, it could be 20 years after the fact, right? They have some, sexual experience at camp when they're 8 years old. That is, to them, at least their narrative is that it was innocuous or weird or whatever. And then they go to therapy or they talk to someone and they're just like, oh my God, you were assaulted. And then suddenly the individual goes down a road of believing they were assaulted, and thus one could develop PTSD or some kind of trauma.
Oh shit, that's my retroactive trauma take.
Reactivity because of that. I would say that that's extremely rare. More often, the way I would, and it's impossible for us to know because it's not a concrete science that we can measure, but the consensus of that is that
I think you're supposed to be very careful when dealing with people's past trauma. It might be the fact that somebody is masking it in some way, and so you have to address it or find a way for them to realize it. But it might also be the way that somebody went through what would traditionally be a traumatic event, but it's not that big a deal, and they're fine about it, and you don't want to like make it a bigger deal than it actually was, is my understanding.
When someone goes through a difficult experience, as we all understand, I hope that the negative effects can be hidden from us.
Masked.
We might be living the negative effects, but we don't attribute them to the trauma. We might be generally suppressing a lot of our emotions because of the trauma or other kinds of reasons. and we don't connect the over drinking or the denial of our feelings or the running into relationships over and over again. We don't attribute that to the trauma until we're in therapy, and then we're like, oh my God, I'm making these connections. I'd never thought of myself as being traumatized when I was 8, but now that I think about it, I think I was. So that's way more common than somewhat, but it is, I think, possible, I think rare. And let me kind of explain it, because this could be a very difficult idea to put out there into the world for me, but that, let's say you go through a difficult event, or let's say you go through a weird event, just sort of some sort of notable sexual event.
I hate that I think he's trying to be really clever now because he doesn't want to get canceled. I think that's literally what is happening in his brain right now, which is so fucking frustrating. It's so fucking stupid that this is where we're at right now, where it's hard for him to have a candid conversation about this because he has to be careful how people will take it. But
any kind, whether it's when you're a kid or older. And it let's just say, for the thought experiment, it doesn't actually traumatize you, meaning it doesn't scare you, it doesn't horrify you, it doesn't teach you negative lessons about the self or other people. And then later on, you're recalling the event with someone and they're like, oh my God,
he's giving my example.
Traumatized. That was an assault. Someone victimized you. And you're impressionable, or you lack other information, education or something. And you start to rewrite the story in your head. You start to actually remember differently, because memory is not a fixed thing. We don't have a videotape in our mind. It's something that every time we recall,
we're recreating it.
Literally rewrite the story.
Yeah.
And so we could potentially rewrite the story we could start inserting horror and terror and anxiety and victimization and exploitation and coercion into that story, that as the memory starts to plague us, it actually could cause negative effects downstream. PTSD probably not, but things like believing that other people can't be trusted, believing that you're not worthy of being treated well. Could that happen? Yeah. But again, I would say that that's extremely rare. Let's say in the order of 1% of the cases that present that way, where someone didn't think it was a trauma and then later on discovered it was a trauma.
Did Brittany disagree with retroactive trauma? Yeah, so she said it, although she's speaking much more carefully with him, but I feel like when she started to speak, I feel like what she said earlier, maybe I'll rewind and listen to it. You can tell me if I'm getting the wrong impression. It felt like what she said earlier was, when I go through a traumatic event, it felt like she was starting to say, I have a hard time imagining that I could ever view it differently based on what people say afterwards. It sounded like she started to say that. And I kind of think and I've had a few different girls email me in this fucking horrible fucking book. I don't even know if it's a bad book or people are misreading it, but it feels like a lot of women have read this pop psych book called The Body Keeps Score, and that they're like, from that book, this main idea they took is that like your body has like a second subconscious that's like remembering traumatic events or something, and that like the body is remembering even if your mind doesn't. It feels like that's the takeaway they're coming from. But maybe I don't know. But I feel like I've had a lot of people email like, oh my God, did you put about The Body Keeps Score? And it's like, okay.
But you had another question in there. There was that was my short answer to the short question that I heard. But anyway, there was another question that you asked that I'm forgetting. Do you remember the question that you
No, because now I have two new questions.
Oh, okay. Let's forget about it. Let's move on.
Okay. Let's see if we can remember it later. I'm curious because you said it when people come to me, and during this debate, we had a few people chime in. People were saying, "Oh, I had this molestation or this rape occur, and I don't feel traumatized from it." My brain goes, "Okay, very interesting." I'm not sure how that's helpful to people who've already been traumatized, because you didn't get traumatized to get over it, but maybe that's insightful. And then the other thing you said earlier, though, is the question I asked them is, but if I looked at your life, do you think I could find some hot mess points? Like, do you think I could look at something and say, oh, this right here feels like this could come from trauma, but maybe it's not trauma to you. Maybe like, I think about like serial cheaters, or I think about people who can't stay in a committed relationship and they go, I was never traumatized. I'm like, seems like a weird thing to do then. Seems kind of cruel if you're not.
This type of thing requires a lot of insight into a person. I don't know if I know a single person in my life, maybe Melina, where I would feel comfortable saying that like, oh, I think you have trauma here that you need to work through, even if you don't realize it. That's a really big mind read, and it's a really personal one, and it could be a really offensive one if you're wrong there, to just tell somebody like, oh, like I know you feel like you're okay, but I know you've been traumatized. That's a big, that feels really gross. But
not traumatized. Because if you're traumatized, then I'm lenient. I'm like, okay, we just got to get you therapy. But if you tell me you're not traumatized and you're a serial cheater, my brain goes, so you're mean? I don't understand, right? So I want to be open to the idea that people can.
That clip is her. No, I know. So the reason why I bring this up is because right now she's saying that, like, she's not saying it out loud, but what she thinks is Ayla, for instance, is super traumatized. She thinks that Ayla is traumatized and broken, but Ayla's too stupid or lacks the insight to understand it herself. That's who she's referencing here with her question to the guy, and so she's trying to reinforce that opinion. She's kind of shopping that opinion in front of him without him realizing it. Which, by the way, to be clear, Ayla might be traumatized and she doesn't know it. I don't know, but like I said, there are very few people that I feel comfortable enough mind reading or saying that, like, oh no, like, you don't know this about yourself, but I know this about you. But there are very, 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 very few people I know in life, maybe like 2 or 3, where I'd feel comfortable ever making that sort of like guess, because that's a big mind read.
Have a relationship with their, I don't want to say trauma now because I'm projecting, like I'm putting it on them, but maybe they don't feel like they were traumatized, but then would they ever know that if they didn't go to therapy? Mm-hmm. You think like therapy is kind of like the key? Well, you know, could you?
You don't need to go to therapy. What you need to do is some form of introspection, which hopefully therapy helps you with. But like, you don't necessarily need therapy to figure out if you're traumatized. It could just be really helpful if you're a person that doesn't normally have any tools to figure out, like, mentally, you know, if you're fucked up or not.
You know without therapy if you were traumatized.
Sure, yeah. Plenty of people know they're traumatized without therapy. Absolutely. Plenty of people go to therapy and never discover they were traumatized. Plenty of people,
really?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it depends on the therapist. There's a lot of different styles of therapy. Depends on the length. Depends on the age of the client a lot of times. As we age, as I've experienced clients, they tend to be more open to talking about these things, you know. I don't want to paint younger people as lacking of self-awareness, but it is sort of a trend, you know. Like when I talk to a 16-year-old, the chance that they're going to have the discoveries that they will discover later at that age is not very high. Having said that, there are plenty of 16-year-olds who are very self-aware, obviously. But yeah, that's. Did I answer the question?
I think you answered it. No, you answered it great. So I, if you wouldn't mind, and again, I'm not sure there's an objective answer for this, but like, what is trauma?
Yeah. Well, we have 2 different main definitions. One is what we call, maybe capital T is sometimes used, trauma, meaning that it is things like anything that produces. This is my definition, and you won't hear other clinicians and researchers necessarily use this word, but it annoys me that they don't. Any experience that produces tremendous terror. Ooh. So if you're in a car accident, and so let's take 2 different car accidents. One where, you know, it's a mild fender bender, and you're not terrified for your life. You're just like, I have to get my car fixed now. You know, it's a disappointment. It's annoying. Right. It's like, I'm not going to be late. But there's no terror. There's no, whereas you have another car accident where you're spinning out of control, or a car is bearing down on you and you have time to sort of.
One thing that's really important, I think, is that terror definition has to include your state of mind at the time. It can't just be a physical sensation. For instance, my guess is going to be that there are going to be car accidents that have less physical forces exerted on your body than certain roller coasters, but the proclivity for a car accident to produce a feeling of trauma is probably way higher because in the roller coaster it's expected. That'd be my guess, right?
Prepare for the fact that you're going to get hit, and your adrenaline just suddenly pumps through your body, and you have this massive fight or flight, freeze, appease, faint response, and you're jittery afterwards, and you're just, okay, that's terror, right? Okay, so I think we can all understand that emotional difference. And then when you're assaulted sexually, it can also have that, it's on that dimension. How much terror did the individual go through? One can be sexually assaulted and not go through a tremendous amount of terror. It can be difficult. It can be harmful to the individual. It can be disappointing and painful, and could start to rewrite someone's feelings about themselves, feelings about others. But they might not have the terror. And when you have the terror, that's what can be the breeding ground.
Nice. So he drew the distinction between, well, I shouldn't say nice, I mean nice, but he's drawing the distinction between just the physical sensation and the state of mind at the time, which is my understanding. True. So it's this fucking body keeps score shit. It's like, he's traumatized me with how much people have brought this up to me and shit.
For PTSD and classic trauma, meaning capital T trauma. So the reason why I include this word terror is because you could be watching the news and over the span of a day or something, say there's a school shooting in your neighborhood and you have a kid that's at that school or even at a neighboring school, and you're just sitting there on the couch watching the television and you're in so much terror, but you weren't there.
Right.
Your child isn't actually in danger, but your adrenaline is pumping so much that...
Oh, another really good example of this. I don't know if I mentioned this on stream before. As a parent, I hate it when Nathan's mom calls me in the middle of the day. If my phone goes off and it's like 1 o'clock and Nathan's mom pops up on the thing, I'm thinking she's gonna tell me like Nathan's daddy got in an accident. Like that's, my mind instantly goes, I don't even know why. But now whenever I see her name pop up on my caller ID and it's like 1 o'clock, I'm like, fuck. Like I don't even know why, but that's instantly where my mind goes. I'm like, holy shit. Obviously I never used to respond that way before, but there's like all the psychological shit that's associated right now.
It's a tremendous amount of terror. And you can develop, in my experience and research shows, you could develop PTSD because of that. And a lot of that is kind of ignored by it. We're still kind of growing and broadening our understanding of trauma. Lower T trauma is what we tend to use in my field for things that were harmful to us in general, that don't necessarily involve terror. So you could, for example, I use the phrase relational traumas. So you could be a young child and neglected. Your parents don't attune to you sufficiently, and you're left to your own devices. Maybe the parents are depressed or alcoholic, or they grew up in avoidant families.
One of the claims in the book is that you can disassociate so hard that your body sees itself as a foreign object and will attack itself, which is why people with PTSD have immune disorders. Seems pretty wacky to me. The problem, I hate to bring this up, I'm so sorry, but the problem is, again, it's the psych terms. You can dissociate. This sounds so gatekeeping, and I don't mean to make it sound gatekeeping. I'm so sorry, but I almost feel like, to use these terms, I almost feel like you need to take a lot of psychedelics. You need to do a lot of drugs, because I hear people use the word, or I might have a wrong understanding of it, but I hear people use the word dissociate when they just mean that, like, oh, like I feel like kind of out of myself. I feel a little bit lost right now. I'm dissociating. Lav does this a lot. I'm sorry. Lav is like the ultimate documenter of every fucking fake psych. Oh yeah, last night I went there and I was so out of it. I totally dissociated. Like, and again, maybe it does mean different things to different people. I remember after my traumatic as fuck mushroom trip, I feel like, because I try to look up like what these things were after I would have a panic attack, I feel like I would experience dissociation. Now for me personally, and I'll qualify for the 50th time even though it doesn't matter, maybe it is different for other people, but for me, dissociation leaves me with a very, very real feeling that I'm separated from my body, everything around me is not real, and it almost feels like I'm in a movie. It's like the strangest feeling ever. The only way to even break me out of it is some amount of time would have to pass, and then I'd have to go outside and have to like take a walk and I'd have to collect new information to feel like I'm reintegrating my mind back into my body. It's a really fucking weird experience. In my personal opinion, the dissociation after a panic attack was worse than the panic attack itself. I hated it. But I feel like I hear girls use this word like dissociation. I was so dissociated. What do you mean by dissociated? I just laid there and I was like out of my body. And it's like, what do you mean by that? Like, and I feel like, yeah, but if you've done like ketamine or if you've done like big, psychedelics, yeah, I feel like, but I don't know. I feel like I hear that word thrown everywhere. Dissociation. And it's like, really? I don't know. But
and neglecting parents themselves, and so they parent their kids in a neglectful way, meaning that the kid might be crying or bored or uncomfortable or happy, and the parents just don't really pay attention. That doesn't have anything to do with terror. That's not anything similar to being in a car wreck or having someone assault you with a knife or threaten you.
Do you think people are just trying to find a word to describe their feelings as best they can? Bro, I'm so negatively loaded right now on all these topics. I'm sorry if this sounds really negative, but like what it feels like to me is it feels like people want a lot of validation for every single feeling they have. And sometimes it's not enough to just feel like kind of shitty. You have to be like the worst thing. So you either need to be super traumatized, like it's not enough to say you have PTSD, you need CPTSD. It's not enough to say it was a bad sexual experience, you got sexually assaulted. It's not enough to say that like my parents kind of like, neglected me. It was like childhood abandonment. Like everything has to be like the most extreme fucking word because it elicits the strongest emotional response from somebody that's listening to you, and it gets you the most amount of like sympathy or notice, I guess. That's what it feels like to me when a lot of people talk about these things, is like seeking that social validation a lot. But I'm really negatively loaded on these topics, so that could just be my opinion.
And sexually assault you and make you feel like you might be dead, or I don't know. And so completely different, but it's a harmful event that will affect the individual long term. That individual could, for the rest of their life, be negatively affected by that lack of attunement, such that, for example, they might shut down their emotions, they might become pathologically independent, they might even become narcissistic, they might not acknowledge their needs or reach out for help ever, and they could literally die early because they don't go to the hospital or ask for help, which is shown in the research. So that is one of thousands of examples of lowercase t trauma.
That makes so much sense to my brain, and I wonder if that was the huge disconnect we were having in the conversation, where in my head, when I said like capital R, rape, I was thinking of saying no and then ignoring it. I was thinking about being forced down. I was thinking...
She's not... Oh, sorry. Fuck, I'm being way too aggressive in this combo. I don't think she's understanding what he's saying at all. She's trying to go back to the body keeps score thing. Oh, well, what if it's a really, really bad rape? If it was a really bad rape, does that mean we could ignore every single thing you just said? That's where she's like going...
Connect we were having in the conversation, where in my head, when I said like capital R, rape, I was thinking of saying no and then ignoring it. I was thinking about being forced down. I was thinking about, of course, I was thinking about my own personal experience, right? I was making it personal, which is not professional, but my brain couldn't comprehend some of the comparisons other people were using. And I wondered in your field, if when you guys are observing a client, if you do consider, like, I know the trauma can be the same, like someone could be molested and then someone could be physically penetrative raped, and they could have the same amount of trauma. I don't want to like trauma hierarchy. I don't want to compare our traumas like that. But I want to say that the experiences are different, that I think the trauma flavor could be different, but not more extreme. Again, I really don't want to, disclaimer, compare traumas like that, but I want to make it clear that I assume we're having different lived experiences, which is why when we have these conversations, there's so much not cognitive dissonance, but like a miscommunication of what we're all talking about. So when someone says to me like, oh, I think a religious person would have this experience with rape over a promiscuous person or a sexually liberated person, my brain again stops at the individual and goes, well, it's going to be different for everyone. But that's not a good enough answer. So is there a general answer, a general consensus in this field?
Yeah. I sort of got to it earlier, which is that there are many factors that play into how traumatizing an event will be. And perhaps these attitudes or belief systems prior, or, whether it's sex positivity or,
oh my God, we did it.
Promiscuity is separate from that, obviously, being religious, being conservative. These things have been studied, and they are a factor potentially.
This is exactly what I was saying. Yes. In
not only one's attitudes as you're going through it, because one of the main factors is self-appraisal afterwards and during. So how do you see the self? Do you blame the self? And how do you assess the self? So if you are raised in a religious environment that says that sex is disgusting and you're disgusting, and there's this avoid...
Oh my God, he's going to give my exact fucking take. He's about to give my exact fucking take. Thank you. I feel heard and seen. Thank you. Thank you, doctor. Doctor, whatever your name is. Thank you.
Of sex positivity or sexual acknowledgement. And let's say that...
I just want to go back to play this whole thing over again.
See the self. Do you blame the self? And how do you assess the self? So if you are raised in a religious environment that says that sex is disgusting and you're disgusting, and there's this avoidance of sex positivity or sexual acknowledgement, and let's say that you go to a party and you dress a little flirty and you have a drink and you maybe talk to some people, and you're thinking, I wouldn't mind getting together with someone tonight, and you believe that that's on the edge of sin or something, and then you get assaulted. Well, for that individual, because of the pre-factors, there's a greater likelihood, we could imagine, that they would self-assess as they're to blame. They brought it on themselves. They dressed in a certain way. They shouldn't have drank. They shouldn't have been there. They should have listened to their parents or their minister or their God or whatever, and they deserve to be punished. They might not even want to tell anyone because of these reasons, right?
Yeah.
So might that, and so research shows that absolutely can increase I know what question you asked that I think is relevant.
Tell me.
You were asking, you were saying that you thought that the trauma only happens, well, I don't know if you were saying, but you were
the main trauma.
Happens during the event, like as you're being assaulted. And research shows that, yes, and there are compounding traumas, you use the word compounding, afterwards. So if, for example, you go through a negative experience, a difficult, traumatic experience of an assault, the next day you wake up and you call your friends and you tell them. So one, you have to have the attitudes present such that you don't feel ashamed of yourself to the extent that you don't tell someone about it, right? Or that you're to blame or you should hide it or whatever. And so then you tell your friends, and your friends are there to listen. You go to the authorities, and they walk you through a process that's very trauma-informed, and there's a whole conversation there. You aren't blamed. You go to therapy. You talk about it. There's a lot of support. You still went through something difficult. It doesn't negate that, and there still could be downstream negative effects from that event, obviously.
I feel like I don't know if it's just because I'm an asshole or people predisposed. I feel like I get gaslit so fucking hard in these conversations. Okay, so this guy is saying almost verbatim every single thing I've ever said about this particular topic. I've had so many people fight with me that everything I'm saying is crazy. But I feel like is she going to push back against this guy at all, or is she going to agree with every single thing he's saying?
But the recovery is enhanced and sped up and bolstered by attitudes and by behaviors and by support. Whereas you take someone in a different situation, given the opposite situation, maybe they go to the police and they walk them through a very common procedure where they swab them, strip them naked, take pictures. No one's there to advocate for them. They're basically re-traumatized physically and sexually, one could argue, by the justice system. And that's an additional trauma. So they're left in a state of terror. So, people might be assaulted. They call the police. The police show. They're still in a state of adrenaline. And then they're stripped naked, thrown around, swabbed. They're asking questions like, when's this going to happen? They're like, well, I don't know. And you just get shuffled around. You're left in that trauma state potentially for weeks. There's no relief to your nervous system. So obviously, independent of the actual event, you have all these other events that could absolutely, and research shows, can massively intensify
any traumatic experience you've had.
Okay, well, that's wonderful news. I think that we now know there's something better we could do. So if I put you in charge of society, what would be a great solution for the general public to make sure that when these situations happen, we allow recovery to happen in the speediest way?
Oh, what a wonderful question. Wait, so I got to do whatever I want?
Yes, to help society.
Yeah, well, I guess practically, because if I could just snap my fingers, I would change everyone's mind. But that wouldn't happen. But so if we actually were thinking practically, we would, it's always been a dream of mine to have schools either add an hour to school or just scale back on certain subjects that are, I guess, less important. I don't know. And you would include an hour a day throughout school from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade where you talk about a lot of things, including this. attachment, relationships, self-esteem, body positivity, LGBTQ rights, critical thinking, how culture affects us, the history of...
This is my take where it's like everybody should be required to take like a philosophy class, just a 101 philosophy class and a 101 psychology class. Wait, why the fuck does my...
society, just all that.
Why are the
Of
health
course,
bars disappearing sometimes?
In this world, that would just never happen. But at the very least, sort of the big issues like the one we're talking about right here. So that'd be one, and that would hopefully give people attitudes heading into an event like this that would give them the resources to get through it and to recover afterwards in a more expeditious, non-complicated way. Would also
when I
potentially
alt-tab,
boost
it
the
fucks?
likelihood
Oh,
of
you're
people
right.
committing these acts to begin with, because the individual research shows, and experts will tell you, that people who commit these acts are often treatable. They're not psychopathic sadists that are walking around just wanting to prey on other human beings. They're suffering in their own way. It doesn't excuse it, obviously, but
Right.
a lot of these individuals, after being caught and prosecuted and forced into treatment, they can recover. There
That's
are
amazing.
attitudes. Yeah, there are attitudes. You have a lot of men, a lot of people, a lot of males who are walking around without any ability to get their attachment needs met, without any ability to process their emotions, and
Yeah.
they are just walking time bombs in a variety of different consequences, including this. And we find that when we actually give them attachments and emotional intelligence and support and treatment and trauma recovery, they're extremely less likely to do this sort of thing in the future. It seems weird. It's like, well, why would you sexually assault someone? Because there's not a clear logical connection, but we have found that to be true. There are individuals who are psychopathic sadists who aren't necessarily treatable and arguably not treatable, but there's even some argument about that. But anyway, so yeah. So
Is this my no one wants to be a rapist take? It's kind of in a different context, but...
I would include an hour a day in school. I would also try to help religious groups to, without changing their identity, shift their rhetoric around body and sexuality and gender and sexual orientation. For example, in Seattle, the vast majority of Christians are pro-LGBTQ. There's no incompatibility there. So it's not a matter of religion as at its core has to be negative, sex negative, and pro. I mean, there's literally people who literally Do you
think she'll change her mind here? No, she's going to come away from this thinking that, like, Destiny thinks that sluts like to get raped, and this guy said that it's actually way more complicated, and he's providing a lot of nuance that you didn't provide. That's probably what she'll think.
Knowing all the details will blame the victim after being assaulted.
Yeah.
You just, like, they won't just imply that the victim is to blame, which is what a lot of people do. Literally, just because they'll be like, the Bible tells me that you're to blame.
Yeah.
And so there's nothing fundamental about these religions, in my view, that would necessitate these attitudes. So I guess if I was in charge, I would force them all to go through some kind of dialogue.
Yeah.
Even with themselves, like maybe just get a church in Seattle to go to, Oklahoma or whatever.
Yeah.
And have just talk, just be, hey, let's, we're all Christians here. Let's talk. So that'd be another thing I would do. I would change the police system drastically. There are movements around that to be more trauma informed. The main thing that I would implement is that there would be an advocate, a citizen, a non-police person who would either be paid or maybe paid, I guess, would be the best solution, obviously, or volunteer if we couldn't come up with the funds. But immediately that advocate would be sitting right next to the survivor and explaining the process and advocating for them. I was like, hey, cool it. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
Cool it. I know that you're out to get the perp, but there's a greater good here of protecting the victim. And I know you're geared towards getting the perp, but the victim is decompensating right now, so take a break. And they would have that power to do that. Or, so we're going to do a swab if you want to, because it will help with the DNA, but you don't have to because you're the victim. What do you want to do? I don't know. I want to give it. I need some time to think about it. Okay, let's give it some. There's a person there that can walk them through the process, and so that would be another thing. There's probably 50 other things, but those are the things that pop into my head.
I love all of them. I think those are all really lovely. Now that we've talked about a general solution for society, because we don't live in that world, and we live in a very, if you're in the United States, we live in a very, I call them bubbles, but we all have different backgrounds and belief systems and relationships with reality. So we don't live in a world where right now we have that cohesiveness to help victims. So what would you recommend individuals do? They find themselves alone, they're having this problem, whether or not they have a support system, they just feel alone in the process. What would you recommend they do as individuals?
Well, two things. One is to do everything you can to stay safe, because when we feel safe, we are, we feel better, and we're able to actually do what it takes to take care of ourselves. So that's number one. Some people are raped by people they live with. So you have to value yourself and know yourself well enough, and I guess have the privilege to be able to get to safety.
Where are these zombies coming from? Why?
The other is to
I don't understand what's triggering these.
From people that are supportive and understanding. But there's so many different pockets, and like you say, the bubbles, and there's no guarantee. But the there's so many different effects. There's so many different experiences. There's so many different ages. There's so many different situations. I mean, sometimes it's literally your husband that does it, or it's literally someone that jumps out at you at an alley, or it's a date rape situation, or you don't remember a lot of it because you were drugged, or maybe even consensually intoxicated. I mean, meaning you decided to get intoxicated. So there's just so many different things, but I would say just prioritize that you went through something very difficult, and unless you intentionally take actions to set up a robust recovery plan, this could negatively affect you in psychological and behavioral and relational ways for the rest of your life. So just to prioritize it, I guess.
Yeah.
And so that might mean
sounds a little victim blamey, Doc.
Your support structure, completely revamping your dating life or your relationship life. It might not, but just prioritize it, and it takes a long time. It's not something that you just potentially do, in one day. It could be something you cultivate over 5 years. It could be a wake-up call. I don't have a lot of sex-positive people in my life right now. I don't have a lot of self-esteem. I don't have a lot of actually supportive people in my life. So it highlights the fact that I don't have those things right now, and I'm going to start to go down a road of building those things and cultivating those things.
I love that. Thank you so much for that. Now, I know we're on a strict time schedule here. Do you have a few minutes to answer questions from the audience, or do you have to go?
Sure. I have a little bit of time.
You just let me know, and then we'll answer a couple questions. Let's see. It says, this is from Aaron. It says, can you ask, since most rape are by guys who are really pushy for sex, getting the girl drunk enough to say yes or something similar, what protecting it says measures can we take to stop that? I think we kind of went over that. What steps can we take to protect ourselves? Do you actually think that there's a specific environment that encourages the possibility of assault to happen at a higher rate outside of extreme situations? Like the college life is pretty typical. People get drunk and go to parties. Is there anything we can do ahead of time other than having a call buddy, maybe getting an Uber to pick us up? Maybe
where did the zombie come from?
Call we do something like that. Is there anything that really helps shift our chances of not getting raped?
Yes, and plenty of people who do
Oh, he's got a caveat, which is true, because this is for the Kellys. They're gonna say, well, what about this? What about this? Even if you take all the protective steps, it might not be enough. That is true. Shit still can happen, and that sucks.
measures.
Yeah.
And yet they don't want to just stay home all the time.
Right.
They want to socialize. But they have the buddy. They know all the signs. They look for the signs. They watch their drink. They don't get too drunk. You could be on a 5th date with someone that had all the signs of someone who wasn't likely to do something like this, and they might do it. So do everything you can, but also if it happens, don't blame yourself for not having done something to prevent it, because sometimes it just comes out of nowhere. And I know that effing sucks to think about, because it's like, how do you control for this if that's the case?
Gotta do what you
how
can.
Do we protect ourselves from this? It's an unfortunate aspect of our society. And like I said, if we had a more rational, healthy way of raising kids, particularly boys, this would be drastically reduced. But until then, there are a lot of things you can do, like just going slow, not getting alone with people.
Sorry.
Even if everything seems like, you're at a party and some guy's like, hey, let's go to my car is just right over there. And and you're like, well, one of the most common things that victims will say is, I just didn't want to make them upset.
Totally.
Being too
I didn't want
passive.
them to get upset. And when they reflect on that, they're just like, why was I? But we all are in that mindset. Mm-hmm. The strongest, most assertive, I consider myself a very assertive person. Under certain circumstances, it just happened to me last night. I was out with my wife, and I won't go into details, but I wasn't assaulted, but someone was being a jerk, and afterwards I thought, why did I put up with that? I had the right to be able to, defend myself, but in the moment I'm just like, but I don't want to bother him, and I don't want to make a scene. That impulse, I don't want to bother him, I don't want to make a scene, is what rapists will use as a tool. And so
yes, which is that I don't want to bother him and I don't want to make a scene is something that rapists will use as a tool. Dude, I hate my life. I just need to bring this guy along with me. Pixie, everybody else keeps saying things like this. A man doesn't accept no, even after a woman asserts it repeatedly. She can physically blah, 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 blah. But this is my response. It's incredibly rare. Most creepy guys will stop if you put up a clear boundary. They're relying on you to acquiesce and just go along with things. Most creepy or pushy people will stop with a simple no or a physical boundary if needed. Yeah.
The faster you can rid yourself of that, and 2, notice it. Like when you're aware of it, like you see yourself doing it, and you're like, oh, I'm doing that thing where I don't want to bother him and I don't want to create a scene. That's a big red flag that something bad could be happening. Maybe not, but maybe.
Do you think that moving forward, let's say we implement all these wonderful Dr. Kirk ideas and society shifts and the world's a little bit better, do you think it looks like a world where we're like, oh my God, guys, I was raped on Tuesday? Like, is that the future we're looking for, where people are so not traumatized by their assault? It's so a part of our expectation as humans that it's more chill? Like, is that our goal? Or is the goal to say we're going to be more compassionate and loving to people who have had something bad happen?
No, I can't imagine with all the healthy changes in our society and education system, political system, justice system, resulting in someone after being assaulted being chill about it afterwards. No, that's not compatible with human experience.
Okay.
Yeah, it wouldn't.
That's what I'm concerned about. I'm concerned that there's an idea floating around the internet
that everybody could be okay with getting raped. Where is this idea floating at?
That if we acted better around rape, maybe people wouldn't be as traumatized by it. But I'm like, I'm not sure what that means.
Yeah, it's based on
But hold on, but what you just said was true. If you act a little bit differently around it, people do have different feelings. Sorry.
On the myth that we were touching on earlier, that if you just look at it a certain way, then it's not trauma. You're just choosing to look at it negatively, which I just find to just, I just want to take them and, punch them in the face as hard as I can 5 times. And then while they're on the ground bleeding, I'm just like, well, you're just looking at it negatively. It's not a big deal.
Exactly.
I mean, it's literally what they're saying. And you're just like, are you that stupid? Or, what kind of agenda? Or I don't know.
The funny thing is that, like, technically he's giving her social validation because that's what she's seeking. She's looking for social reassurance. But, like, I want to punch somebody 5 times in the face when they're on the ground. There are people that get punched multiple times in the face and don't necessarily get traumatized by it. It's professional fighters. But why? It's because they have an expectation of going into the ring and fighting, right? Having somebody beat the shit out of you in the ring is probably gonna be a lot different for predicting trauma than having somebody that's beating the shit out of you on the street or having a partner beat the shit out of you, right? There's a different factor there, right?
I think, do you want me to be honest? I think they want to look tough. Like, they weren't victimized. But my brain is just like, yeah, dude, it sucks. Like, I hate it. Like, I personally hate having PTSD. But at the same time, it logically makes sense. Like, something bad happened. And so this happens now. But the idea that if I just thought about it different, I was like, maybe I need more therapy. Maybe that's what's wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, and it plays into the self-shame of a lot of victims, right?
Right. I didn't recover fast enough. I'm still in pain. Why am I still suffering? Why can't I get over this? Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And, I mean, I'll have to calm down because it's so upsetting. Yeah, I've heard that before, and I think I just heard someone saying something like that the other day, and yeah, it's truly awful.
It's a lot, and I want there to be a compassionate understanding, compassion meaning to suffer with. I want there to be an awareness, too, that we might not be able to see people and therefore might not be able to help them. But I want people to know that if you have been assaulted and you feel like you're not traumatized from it, like, I feel like that could be a real lived experience that I want to acknowledge. It's hard for me to process it, but it must exist amongst 8 billion people, right? Do you think so? Like, do you think people can experience it and truly come out just, like, good? Like the same way they felt yesterday? Yeah?
Yeah, there are documents. I mean, it's hard to know because we're asking for subjective experiences, but there are documented cases that people will go through what, from an outsider's point of view, you're just like, well, that's going to leave a mark psychologically. Yeah. And they will not have any symptoms. And they might attribute it to their resilience or their attitude while it was happening, their connection with the divine, or I don't know. There's various different ways that people will frame it.
Apparently being religious is a protective factor for a lot of PTSD. Maybe because religious people feel like things happen for a reason, so they have like it like helps them deal with adverse events better, but yeah.
But yeah, that variability does exist. The a-holes of the world will say, see, that's evidence that if you just had a better attitude, then everything would be fine. That's not the conclusion. There's just a wide variety of experiences, a wide variety of reactions to an event like that.
That's ultimately my concern, and that's why I think I was a little upset in my feelings about the way that the conversation was happening, because again, I did get a lot of comments, which is like, I understand humans are going to human. I did get a lot of people saying like, see, Brittany can't handle her trauma, but look how this person handles their trauma. And I'm like, I want to handle it the way they're handling it, but I can't. So I'm asking for like an understanding perspective of, I don't know what's wrong, except what, I did in therapy, which is I understand it logically, and yet I can't introspect my way through my trauma. So I assume it's not as simple as if I just thought about it hard enough.
Yeah, no one chooses to have PTSD. No one's just like, you know what? I just want PTSD so I can get sympathy. Like, that's never happened in the history of humankind. No one wants the debilitating, horrific nature of PTSD or depression or low self-esteem.
Nobody wants to have it, but I do think there are a lot of people that will say they have it. Absolutely.
Or self-hatred or avoidance of sexuality. No one wants that. No one says that's the better path. No one chooses that. It happens to people. So,
that right there that's where we need to end this conversation, so we can clarify, does trauma happen to us, or is it the way we perceive it that makes it exist in the first place?
It's the latter, almost certainly. There's going to be a bit of the former because some events are just so physically traumatizing. It's hard to imagine you not developing some sort of trauma response, like some forms of rape, some forms of physical assault for sure. But we just spent the whole conversation talking about the latter part, but she's looking for the social reassurance again that, like, tell me it's just something that happens to us and nothing we can do is going to change that fact.
It's
both.
Could
so
be both?
I don't want to quickly answer, but I'll just a medium answer by saying that there are many factors that contribute to the effects of an event like that. And of the 100 different factors, one of them has to do with one's attitudes and perceptions.
Yes. Which is the yes.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's really reasonable, and I always assume that, like, everyone's always 50% right. Like, what wisdom do you have? What wisdom does this person have? So I think overall, I feel much more comfortable after having this conversation with you, just to give us some sort of, like, place to jump off of. And I wondered, from your perspective, if you think, how many more years moving forward do you think until we come to a much better consensus or relationship with assault, rape, trauma, compassion in this regard? Do you think we're 10 years off, 50 years off?
Probably closer to 50. In my lifetime, I'm 52, and so I've seen shifts, but not much.
Damn. Okay. Are you hopeful?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of good things now. A lot of good things that are happening now. But in the interim, a lot of people are going to suffer unnecessarily because of our stupidity as a society and our refusal to acknowledge reality. I mean, it's science. It's scientific. It's measured. It's understood. It's not a debate. And it's, sometimes as a scientist, I feel like I'm screaming through this window that is soundproof. Me and other scientists are just like, and we've been doing it literally for decades, and society just keeps walking by the window, and we don't exist to them.
I'm sorry, one more question, is that okay? And then I'll really let you go. I'm just curious, because I know every therapist is different, every person in this field is different. Do you think, because I got my therapy in Seattle, I was living in Seattle at the time, so I feel really, really grateful because they're very sex positive and very self-aware of all my alternative lifestyles. They knew not to contribute my trauma to my alternative lifestyles, which was really great. Do you think some people are getting less quality therapy if it's coming from a certain belief system versus like an objective science perspective? Not that science is perfect, but do you think that you should strive, if you're seeking out therapy, to go for somebody who's more like a specific background? I don't want to, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, one should, and it's really hard to do this, but one should try to be as knowledgeable as possible about the landscape of therapy and the types of therapy and the types of therapists, and know what they want out of therapy and find the right fit. And that's hard to do because you don't really know someone until you meet them.
Yeah.
It's kind of like dating in a weird way, that you could read the website, you could maybe talk to them on the phone, but until you meet them and you have a few sessions with them, you don't really know if they're the right ones. But the other thing is most people don't really even know the landscape. They don't even know the options. They don't know if therapy isn't working for them or not. So this is another perfect world thing. I would fund nationally a program that and I was talking with someone else about this actually, that it would essentially be a social worker that would, their only job would be to help people find the right therapist. This individual would know. They would interview the individual, the client, and get a landscape of the sort of figure out.
Isn't that what Erudite does?
Actually, I think, and this individual would know all the different kinds of therapy and would know all the research and know.
Oh, that would be so helpful.
Have a list, and then would walk them through and would check in after 3 sessions. So is it feeling helpful to you? Are they listening to you? Do you feel like this is actually enriching your life? How do you feel afterwards? And then maybe say, maybe we should try someone else. That to me would be helpful.
That would be so helpful.
As it is, you're kind of shooting in the dark, and you're just kind of luck of the draw. But I encourage people to jump ship if things aren't working out. Is the thing. Like,
thank you for saying that. I really appreciate it, because I had to email over 70 therapists to find just 2 that would see me, and one of them was just not a good fit. And the second one, I swear, she changed my life. I was like, holy, she just knew my brain and knew how to humanize me. It was great, but I had to personally take it upon myself to email all those people and say, this is my issue, can you help me? And so
you knew to jump ship with that first therapist?
I was raised very opinionated. So yeah, I asked her, I was like, I'm feeling like you're not hearing me a little bit, and I'm just concerned that you are writing me off. And so she was like, oh, well, I just feel like meds would be better for you. I was like, I'm open to meds. I'd prefer 10 sessions before meds. And so she was like, I feel like you need meds or I'm not going to see you. And I was like, oh, that feels threatening. So I switched out. I got a new one, and the second one was like, I loved her. She was a miracle worker. I don't know. She changed my life. So yeah, I did DBT with her. It was great. It was the greatest thing ever. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Now, Dr. Kirk, I really appreciate you being here. I don't want to take up any more of your time. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Now, is there anything you want to tell my audience or where they can find you? I know you're on YouTube, just Dr. Kirk Honda, and that's how they can find you, right?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Maybe we'll talk again soon. I really hope so.
Okay.
Have a great day. Bye.
In my head, in real life while in bed, my belly's being fed and I'm okay.
I wonder what our after stream chat was like.